It's time to fasten your seatbelt and rev up that engine. It's time to go on Pit Row. On Pit Row is your weekly look inside the world of NASCAR. Now live, here's the pit crew, Steve Ronkowitz and Charlie Turner.
Boogity. Let's go on Pit Row, boys.
Well, you're right. It is Steve Ronkowitz and Charlie Turner and Dan Beaver. And hopefully later on we'll have Beth Ann Heisler joining us, and we're going to be here and talk all about the Eliminator round for the chase to the Sprint Cup, right? That's the only story, and that's the big dog in the room, right, guys? Steve, how are you out in Sylvania, Ohio?
Just great. Feeling terrific.
Dan, how are things down in Central Texas? I know you were bragging about it earlier, so I'll just let you brag a little more.
I've been picking up pecans for the last couple of days from my neighbor's trees that fall into my yard. I've got half a bucket. I'm doing great.
Yeah, I think pecans up here are about $19 a pound, I think. That'd be a nice thing to be able to pick up in your backyard.
I was worried there for a second. I thought he said he was picking up cons. I thought it was a big breakout somewhere. A little free labor down there in Central Texas.
No, I think he said pecans.
Pecans, okay.
You joke, but when you walk into the mini marts, the convenience stores around here, there's a sign that reminds you that slave labor is against the law. Only in
well, thanks for the reminder. I will have to remember that now. Yeah, let me make a note. Let me write that down.
You aren't that close to the border around down there, are you?
Apparently we're close enough that it's become an issue.
Wow.
Okay, well, anyway, welcome NASCAR fans to this week's live on Pit Row Hangout. We're going to talk about the big race at Talladega last weekend, the Geico 500 won by Brad Keselowski that eliminated four very popular drivers from going any farther in the chase of the Sprint Cup Championship. Dale Earnhardt Jr., NASCAR's most popular driver, out. Jimmy Johnson, six-time winner, out. Casey Kane, the other Hendrick driver, out. Kyle Busch should have been in, out. Who's the biggest surprise there? I guess it's got to be probably Kyle Busch, right? Based on where he was going into that race.
Depends on when you ask the question. If you ask the question from the perspective of the beginning of the chase, the biggest surprise is Jimmy Johnson. I mean, this is the first time in more than a decade that he's not going to be part of the chase conversation. If you ask the question at the beginning of Talladega, then it was Kyle Busch. There was almost no way that he could not advance with that 26-point cushion over the elimination bubble. The one thing that had to happen did, that to knock him out. And even then, he wouldn't have gotten knocked out if one of the, unless Keselowski, Johnson, or Earnhardt won to change that elimination bubble. So at the beginning of yesterday, or the beginning of the Talladega race, the biggest surprise, I think, to the end was Kyle Busch not being in there.
How confident were you in Dale Earnhardt Jr. when he led early in the race and he and Johnson were really dicing at the front of the field for the first, I don't know, it seemed like first 60 or 70 laps anyway, that one of them would be there at the end? I had the feeling that one of them was going to be the guy that transferred, not Keselowski at that point, but they faded.
At that point, I thought Johnson was going to be the driver to win. He seemed to have the motivation, or he seemed to have the ability to will his car to the front. Junior, not so much. I know that he was very popular when he got to the lead, but he didn't seem to be able to just drive there at will. And neither did Keselowski until those final laps. And then you waved that red flag in front of him, or the Bulls' red flag, not the NASCAR's red flag, and he just took the bit, and I'm mixing my metaphors here, but at that point there was no stopping him. You kind of knew when you got to those last laps that he was either going to be in the lead or crash trying, and you got that feeling about Johnson at the beginning, but kind of what's been typical for Johnson just faded there after the three-quarter mark.
And Johnson led more laps than anybody else in the race, so he would be the guy that you would think, at least early on, was going to be the guy who would have a chance to win. But did any of us pick Keselowski to win that race?
I don't recall. I picked Danica Patrick, and I looked good for about 50 laps, and that was it.
Yeah, I think one person did, and I think that's one reason.
There's always a reason he brings that stuff up.
I just wondered. Memory fades as I started getting into my older years.
Geez.
But
how's that double jointed elbow of yours working now?
it is working quite well. Thank you very much.
So what made you pick him? Did you really? Was that just like a Talladega hunch, or did you really think that he's strong enough to win no matter where you are?
There's just something about that kid that I've always liked, and I guess he's the new polarizing guy in NASCAR. Either you love him or you hate him. But Charlie, when you and I met him at an ARCA preseason meeting, what was it? Probably 10 years ago, maybe anymore.
2008, I think it was.
Yeah, so 7 years ago, there was just something about him at that time. You just kind of got this feeling that this kid was going to go somewhere. At least I did, and he's got something in his makeup that sends him to the front, by gosh or by golly, whether you love him or you hate him. And if anybody was going to get it done, I just had that feeling.
And kind of discovered, at least NASCAR-wise, kind of discovered by Dale Earnhardt Jr., who famously gave him that ride in that Nationwide Series car, and calling him in a plane ride back from somewhere. I don't remember where now. I think it was back from an ARCA race. And put him in that Navy car for Dale or for whatever Junior Motorsports, I guess it was, and he's never looked back.
And gave him his couch as well to sleep on for a period of time as well. So they were
he can afford his own couch now.
Well, I think he probably owned his own abode as well. But at the time, he was looking for a place to stay, and he was staying with Junior for a while.
Yeah. Probably not a bad place to stay if you're a single guy, at whatever age he was at that time. That might have been a pretty popular place to hang out. We're joined, by the way, popular people, Danica. Danica Heisler.
Danica Heisler. Hey, Danica, welcome.
Hey, Beth Ann, how are you? Hopefully she heard that. Or maybe I don't want her to hear that. I don't know.
She didn't smile, so I have a feeling she's not hearing you.
But she's not shaking her head in disgust either. So anyway,
but actually, while we're talking about people that got picked last week, if you don't believe yet, despite all the evidence to the contrary, that there is a such thing as a beef jinx, I picked Kyle Busch.
That's right. I'd forgotten about that. Let's talk about Kyle, because that was the underlying drama of the race. Really, they kept flashing to the garage where they're trying to tape that car back together, and he just almost got into the chase anyway. Didn't miss by much, but that was a huge story.
Had such a cushion, and they rebuilt that car. That car was destroyed. They rebuilt it in 45 minutes, and that was a Herculean effort. Just there wasn't enough attrition after the one little big one that to make a difference. Yeah. But man, what they did. They deserve great kudos for that, even though they came up short.
They actually had a pretty good. I think that 18 car had a pretty good year this year, and I'm a little bit surprised at the big changes that are coming up there. But they have another driver they've got to make room for and make a team for in Carl Edwards next year. So and Carl, who would have believed that Hendrick Motorsports would have one car in the last 8 of the chase, and these other teams have got several. I mean, Gibbs has got Kenseth and Hamlin in, and almost got Kyle Busch in. Who else? RCR's got Ryan Newman's in there. I mean, I'm just surprised at the makeup of the final 8 drivers, I guess. If you look at who's going to be the favorite to advance, I don't think it changed a whole lot. There's probably still 3 of the guys that we thought were going to be there will be there, but the 4th one's going to be kind of a wild card deal.
Well, if you go back and look at my chase grid from the beginning.
Yeah, I was giving you this is your softball, okay? I'm tossing it up for you.
I had 6 of the 8 drivers. The ones I missed on were Kyle Busch, which I think is a surprise, and Jimmy Johnson, which is everyone's surprise. And I predicted that Dale Earnhardt Jr. and Casey Kane would both get knocked out in this last round. So where the chase grid was concerned, I had it, but now I think I had Johnson going to the Final Four. We'll have to wait and see what happens there, but I think what we're seeing is the four strongest drivers have made it this far, and it was scary. It was a squeaker for Keselowski, but we've got the four strongest drivers in the Final 8, and unless something really weird happens, they're going to be the four drivers that make it to the Final Four, and that's Keselowski, Logano, Gordon, and that other guy, Happy.
Yeah, they have been the four all year. That's for sure. No question about that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that goes back to exactly what Darrell Waltrip said to us last year. These guys eliminate themselves. There's really no need to have this competition in a way because they, by hook or by crook, they will find a way to eliminate themselves, and it's almost pretty much what is scripted out.
We talked to Darrell Waltrip on this show last year, almost exactly a year ago here, and he said that right from the beginning it was Kenseth and Johnson were the two drivers, right, Steve? I mean, he said it was apparent to him at Daytona in February that they were the two drivers. I kind of doubted that a little bit, but Darrell was firm on that. He says it's obvious who they are, and I think he would probably agree with you, Dan, that these are the four this year.
Yeah.
No, if anything,
we don't know. We don't have DW on here this week. But.
Yeah, the one thing though that you have to figure though, at least if this last week was any indication, you don't know who the heck's going to advance to that Final Four. Just about anything can happen over these next few races, and it could be a real wacky time. You could end up with Newman and Edwards and God knows who, you know?
Yeah, and this coming race this weekend could be the one that knocks, one or two of the favorites out very easily.
The wild card's going to be the winners. Everybody thinks that those are the four, but if Hamlin wins this week, if somebody else wins next week at Texas, then you've got that shrinking number of positions that can get in on points, and not everybody's going to do it. You're going to have definitely a top 10, probably sweep the top 5 in order to have enough points to be the one driver that makes it to Homestead based on points. And that's not going to be Newman, it's not going to be Kenseth, but that's not to say that they can't win one of these next 3 races and knock one of those other guys out. And Hamlin, of course, has a good shot here and at Phoenix if he can get his short flat track program back together, which has been questionable this year, last couple of years. But these are tracks that should be good for him. So.
Hey, Beth Ann, can you hear us now? I know you're back. You've been in and out a little bit here.
Well, my sound's a little bit weird.
Now we hear you fine, and we can see it. So welcome to the show. Hopefully you got a chance to hear some of what we talked about. I know, who did you have in this past in the race last Sunday? I know you got a chance to watch it.
Jamie McMurray.
Jamie Mack.
The leaky one.
Yeah, neither one of the Ganassi boys were able to finish top 10, and I thought they were a decent bet for that as well. So, all right, so before we move on and talk about anything else, one of the things that I thought was a little bit here's my question for you: is Casey Kane now officially a lame duck driver for Hendrick Motorsports? I've never seen a driver ignored more who was a potential championship contender up until the end of that race Sunday by an owner. It's like he's got the plague. At least that's what I see. Maybe I'm seeing it wrong.
I don't know what his contract holds or how long his contract is good for, but he is, at least in my eyes, he has never lived up to what I believe Hendrick thought he was going to be. He's won a race here and there, but he's been in a chase here and there. But has he ever been a serious contender for a championship? I don't think so.
Yeah, and his contract runs through next year, I believe, and that's why my prediction is that we don't hear from him at all in 2015, and that becomes Chase Elliott's car in 2016. But the same thing's true about Earnhardt. He really has not contended for championships there either. It's been Johnson for the last couple of years, but at least Earnhardt and Gordon had enough personality, force of personality, that they refuse to be ignored. Kane seems to be just a nice guy without, he's not forceful enough to make sure that he's always there front of mind. And that may be what's happening back at the shop as well.
What do you make of Dale Earnhardt Jr.'s comments over the last, I don't think it was this week, it might have been last week, that he had said that he didn't really expect to ever retire from racing driving a Hendrick Motorsports car.
I didn't hear that, actually. I'd be surprised. I'd be surprised if they don't find a way to keep him there. But he moved to Hendrick because he wanted to contend for championships. And that just isn't happening. But I don't think it's certainly not Hendrick's fault. I don't know where he could go and have a better fit, be a better overall match. I think he's got to fix some stuff with Dale Earnhardt Jr. before he contends for championships. So if he's thinking that the grass is greener someplace else, it's not going to be.
Now, he alluded to the fact that Junior Motorsports might be the place he hung him up from, which would be an interesting thing.
I can see that being one of those long, drawn-out retirement scenarios where you just go race for yourself, have fun doing it for a couple of years, build the team up, and go from there. I think that's what I always thought Dale Earnhardt Sr. was doing, even though he never admitted to it, that's what DEI was for him, a place for him to go when it became time to be fun, and he just didn't get to that stage of his career because of the tragic death at Daytona.
Yeah, maybe Junior will field a pair of Sprint Cup cars, one for him and one for the designated rocking chair guy. You could put Mark Martin in there for a couple of years, and then whoever's next after that. Who's due for a rocking chair? There's got to be a couple of guys out there. Jeff Burton, maybe. I mean, we put the governor in there. What do you think, Beth? You want to see Junior in a JR Motorsports car with let's see, what would his sponsor be? What do you think? Could he get Budweiser back?
I don't know. Could he go with Viagra yet, or is that too soon?
There you go. Yeah, Mark Martin and Dale Earnhardt Jr.
The true answer to that question is nothing that any of us will answer.
It should actually be Cialis. They could have Martin in one and Gordon or Junior in the other one. It'd be like dueling bathtubs. It's like that commercial, you know.
Hey, you'll notice none of us are really touching that one, so.
Literally or figuratively, Dan.
Cowards, you are all cowards.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we're about halfway through this show. We're more than halfway through this show already. But time flies when you're just having a blast. So let's talk about our comment. I think I put up the comment on the Facebook page this week, and it was something along the lines of who surprised you more, either making or not making the chase. So that's it's got to be not the chase, the eliminator round. I saw the first couple of comments were, Jimmy Johnson kind of things, but who surprised you the most of the four that didn't make the transfer? Who was your biggest surprise? Mine would be Johnson.
Well, I would say it would probably have to be Johnson as well, just from the standpoint that you figure he's going to win a championship from the get-go.
Yeah, my response earlier, it depends on when you ask the question. At the beginning of the chase, definitely Johnson. You just figured that he was going to find a way to do just good enough to get there, and he might have if it hadn't been for the wild cards.
Beth, I think she's going to make it unanimous. I think she figured it was going to be.
Except I kind of thought Johnson would have it tied up in the last race before we even got to Talladega. So I guess I wasn't as surprised that he didn't make it through Talladega because of the track. Then Yeah,
you thought he was going to win at Charlotte. Yeah, so did I.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought he'd be in Charlotte. So I was surprised by that.
All right. Well, we'll monitor the Facebook page this week and see what other people think. But I think Jimmy Johnson's going to be the runaway winner on that one. Steve, what do they win if they're the comment of the week?
Well, if you submit your Shell Saver Card comment of the day, you can take home a $50 Shell gift card. And also remember, anytime the Joey Logano driver, that 22 Shell Pennzoil Forward Fusion, wins a 2014 points race, as he has multiple times this year, you get to save 22 cents per gallon on any grade of Shell nitrogen-rich gasoline or Shell diesel just by using that Shell Saver Card on the Wednesday after the race. Valid up to 25 gallons. Go to shell.us/Wednesday for all the details, as they say.
Okay, so now we go to. We didn't talk about Ryan Newman's penalty. I want to throw that out there real quick too. Newman was penalized, or looked like he was going to be penalized for the car being too low in that race. Ends up, Dan told me right before the show that they came out today and announced that there was no penalty. They deemed that the car was too low due to crash damage, which seems pretty odd based on where the crash damage was. But had it been a legitimate rules violation on one of these transfer races, what should NASCAR's policy be? Should there be a different policy during this chase because these are such short qualifying deals? Should penalties have a bigger? I'm thinking maybe penalties should be harsher during the chase than they are during the regular season.
Well, you have to be harsh enough that it doesn't promote the cheating aspect. The worst thing you can do in a sport that already has a seriousness problem to it, people taking the sport seriously, is to not take guys and, bring the hammer down on them. And you can't cheat and move along. So you have to make sure that that penalty is good enough, big enough, strong enough that they cannot cheat and move along.
I would agree with that, but you say it at the beginning of the season, and if you're going to double the penalties during the chase for chase drivers, then NASCAR has come up with this tiered penalty process, where first time it's not such a bad penalty, second time it's worse, third time it's catastrophic, and maybe they need to change that going into the chase for chasers. So if you get all the way to the chase and you haven't used your gimme, and you're only going to be penalized 15, 25 points, there is really very little incentive not to cheat.
Particularly at a track like Talladega, where it's such a crapshoot.
Mm-hmm. But cheating is part of the rich history of and tradition of our sport. That's why we have Smokey Yunick and some of these other guys. So if you can get away with it, if you can play in that gray area and get away with it, that's part of it. But I agree. I think NASCAR, the penalties should be much heavier when it's deemed to be an advantage. There are a lot of penalties out there that cars get penalized, drivers get penalized for things that really was not an advantage. And those kinds of penalties I don't think need to be impacting the chase. But if lowering the car gets them however many units downforce they get, then that probably should be enough so that they don't advance based on something like that.
So what do you think, Beth Ann? You were a notorious cheater when we raced slot cars. What do you think you should be getting past and you can get away with cheating, or what?
I'm sorry. Could you repeat that?
I said you were a notorious cheater when we raced slot cars.
Oh yeah.
You're probably all on the side of the cheaters here, right?
Is it cheating if nobody knows about it? So.
Spoken like a racer. Okay. Enough of that. So let's we're going to Martinsville, which is one of my favorite tracks. I have half a dozen favorite tracks. But Martinsville, I really like the races there. There is a wild card aspect to it, but I think I'm going to defer to the fantasy racing expert here, who's going to take charge of the rest of the show. But that track is much more predictable than the wild card place we just came from, right, Dan?
Absolutely. You get some long streaks, not only of top 10s here, but of top 5s and victories. Once the driver finds the rhythm on this track, it seems like they just can't lose it for a long time. And the converse is also true. If they struggle here, They seem to struggle for a long time until finally that switch flips. So you can look at last year's race, you can look at this spring's race, and pretty much set your favorites based on that. We have 5 drivers that enter Martinsville with back-to-back top 10s. We had 6 drivers that swept the top 10 last year, and those define your favorites. Weird things happen from time to time, so you can't be surprised if a driver gets knocked out of the way, especially with a lot of the bad blood that's here. I mean, last week we had Kenseth pushing Keselowski to victory lane after all the problems they had the week previously at Charlotte, and you think there's no way that can happen. But Kenseth needed a strong finish. Keselowski, being right on Keselowski's bumper was the best way for him to serve his own needs. Now that that's gone, though, Kenseth and Keselowski, Hamlin and Keselowski, Bowyer and Gordon, they're on Kurt Busch and Keselowski. Actually, Keselowski and pretty much the entire field, except for Joey Logano, there are a lot of people gunning for that guy, and if you're going to pay someone back in place, they're going to do it. So you get some of the favorites that get knocked out for that reason. But that's always been the case. We've always had some epic animosity going into short tracks, and still, a Jimmy Johnson can record 5 victories in the span of 6 races. A Jeff Gordon can record 7, 8 consecutive top 5s. Denny Hamlin had 3 victories in a second place in 4 consecutive races. Preceding that, he had a 5th and a 1st. And the trick is in knowing how to stalk the competitor to the point where you can pass them without them being able to get to you and do anything. And that's something that is really important at Martinsville, and there are a number of drivers that have just figured it out. So we go from the most unpredictable track to probably the most predictable track. You should be able to figure out who's going to run in the top 5 here, not just figure out who's going to run in the top 10. And you get some dark horses sometimes in that 6th and 12th place range, but they're almost never any huge surprises. That being said, Kurt Busch won this year, this spring, and that was his first, not only his first top 5, his first victory, but his first top 10 in like 17 races. So, you know, stuff happens.
So you throw that one out? I mean, is that just like the exception that proves the rule? You just kick that one out of there?
I think you do, and unless he backs it up this week, and then you factor it in next year. But you certainly, it doesn't make him a favorite this year or this week. So in the game, you kind of know who's going to be there, and you have to decide whether or not they fit with your gameplay. Whether it's a salary cap game or it's the Yahoo game, which we talk about here mostly, you know that Jimmy Johnson, Jeff Gordon are going to contend for top 5s unless something weird happens. So if you've got 4 allocations remaining for those drivers combined, one of them should be on your roster. Jimmy Johnson, probably I would favor a little bit over Jeff Gordon because Johnson has something to prove after missing the chase, and he wants to at least go down. He wants to be remembered for something other than missing the chase. I think Kyle Busch is in that same category. He's hit and miss here, but when he hits, he gets top 5s. When he misses, he finishes well outside the top 10, it seems. But he also has something to prove, so that's another driver that's going to be at the front of the field. If you don't have Gordon, Johnson available to you, or if you want a differentiator, because most people are going to start the Hendricks guys, then Kurt or Kyle Busch is your guy. Kevin Harvick's good for a top 10, but probably not a top 5, so that makes him a driver to avoid this week just because you're going to be able to use him more predictably probably at Texas next week. So those are the kinds of things that you're looking for. Once we get down to Group B, you're looking at drivers who can get those consistent top 10s. And that is a little more challenging. You've got Clint Bowyer down there who's got the longest streak of top 10s, the longest active streak of top 10s at Martinsville with 5. Last week he had a similarly good record at Talladega and was able to back it up with another top 10. So that could indicate that this team has finally got their act together. So I think he makes a good choice in Group B. He makes at least a good dark horse in Group B. You've got Joey Logano, Brad Keselowski certainly are going to be there in the top 10 someplace. Keselowski had a 4-race streak of top 10s going until he got into the pit road kerfuffle with Kurt Busch. Another guy who is probably flying under the radar screen quite a bit, Greg Biffle. Roush Fenway is not known as being particularly strong in short flat tracks. Seems like I say that every time we come to a short flat track, and then I say except. So maybe I need to start to rethink that a little bit. But he has 3 top 10s and 5 top 15 last 6 races at Martinsville, and his worst finish is an 18th. So that means he's got a relatively manageable downside and a pretty good upside where Group B is concerned. You got Eric Almirola finished in the top 10 earlier this year and had top 10 sweep in 2012 in his first year with Richard Petty Motorsports. You got Marcus Ambrose, who finally seems to be getting the rhythm on short flat tracks. He has 2 top 10s in his last 3 races here. So you've got some pretty good dark horses if you don't want to just keep playing the way that using up those drivers like Carl Edwards and Ryan Newman that always seem to be at the top. You get down to Group C, and it's the same story. Larson and Dillon are going to be the 2 top finishing rookies. Dillon outperformed Larson earlier this year, but Larson's been much better on short flat tracks in the last 3 races than Dillon has. I think the edge goes to Larson in that rookie battle again, as it will for the final 4 races. And if you've got those drivers, both of them probably are going to finish somewhere in that 6th to 15th place range, which makes them a good value in Group C. After that, you've got Danica Patrick and Justin Allgaier with identical average finishes in the 6 short flat track races at Phoenix, New Hampshire, Richmond, and Martinsville so far this year. So I think that becomes a little bit of a coin toss. And if you've got enough allocations, Danica probably is the better choice by a very slim margin. But if you don't, then Allgaier is the better choice by that equally slim margin. And they're probably both going to finish someplace in the high teens to low 20s. Danica's got better equipment or better funded equipment than Allgaier does, but that doesn't always matter on short tracks. These are drivers' tracks where the equation of skill versus horsepower tips slightly in the balance of skill away from horsepower. So that's a good time to start people like Allgaier when you need them. But if you don't need them, then you might as well. That horsepower is not hurting them; it's not helping them as much. So if you don't have to start Allgaier, Danica might be a little bit safer. But if you are running out of allocations for Dillon, Larson, and Patrick, I think Allgaier, this and Phoenix are his 2 best chances to finish close enough to those guys to make them a good allocation management play.
All right, so lots of stuff to consider this week at Martinsville. Lots of drivers who could do well. And now we're on the spot. This is where we get on the spot. And since Steve was bragging about picking the winner last week, he gets to go first this week. So who you got this week, Steve-O?
Oh, it's easy. Kyle Larson.
Kyle Larson. I think that's probably the 10th time you've taken him this year.
I think it is, and I still believe he's going to get a win this year, so no better place.
Martinsville. Okay, Dan, what do you think of that?
What do I think of that? He wouldn't be my top choice, but I think we'll get a top 10.
All right, so who is your top choice? You don't get out of it that easy.
Let's see. I really have got to get someone to pay me not to pick them. Someone's got to be paying attention. Johnson. I'm going with Johnson.
Beth Ann, who you got?
I'm going to say Casey Kane.
Casey Kane for the vengeance win.
Yeah, she likes watching The Walking Dead too, so that's appropriate.
All right, well, I'm going Jimmy Johnson because this is Jimmy Johnson's first win of sweeping the last 4 races of this year's schedule, so he can prove that he should have been the 7-time champion this year, even though this screwy chase schedule screwed him out of it. So Jimmy Johnson for the first of 4 in a row. How's that?
I'm going to hold you that for the next 3 races, though.
That's fine. I got no problem with that. I'll take, you tell me who's going to be a better pick the next 4 races than him going into this right now today. I'll take it. All right, so that's it for this week. We've had fun. Thanks, guys, for joining us, and thanks everybody for who's watching and comes back to watch the replays. We appreciate it. Follow Dan Beaver at Fantasy Race on Twitter, Beth Ann at My Metro Toledo, Steve at Bench Racing, me at On Pit Row. If you follow us on Twitter, that'd be cool. Come over to our Facebook page, leave a comment there. Maybe win $50 from Shell this week for the best, most entertaining comment. And we'll get to that sometime around Friday. We'll pick a winner. So thanks again. We'll be back next week. We'll talk about the results of this race at Martinsville, and then we'll preview going to Texas for the second race of the Eliminator round of the 2014 Chase to the Sprint Cup Championship. How's that? Brian France, send me a check.
You've just been on Pit Row, and now you're up to speed with the best information about the world of NASCAR. Come back next week and join the pit crew, Steve and Charlie, and go on Pit Row. On Pit Row is a presentation of Bench Racing Productions.
Hey, this is Jeff Hammond from NASCAR on Fox and Speed, and all the cool people hang on Pit Row.
This is On Pit Row. On Pit Row.